Chapter 064. Distance. Eldamar and Koth were very far from one another. The exact distance was hard to pin down since the name Koth covered a pretty big area on the southern continent, but Zorian estimated it to be around 7,000 kilometers minimum. Worse, this was a straight-line distance, so the actual journey would be even longer. It was not impossible to make that journey in the span of a month, but just reaching the place was not enough for Zack and Zorian. They needed to reach it with plenty of time to spare, or else they would have no time to search for the piece of the key that was supposedly lost there. Additionally, if they spent most of their time in transit to Koth, they could not make use of the black rooms scattered across Altazia. Thus, by committing themselves to such a journey, they effectively lost more than a single month of time. There were two main methods of traveling from Eldamar to Koth. The simplest as well as the cheapest method was to board a ship at the city of Luja and make your way to Koth by sea. Even the cheaper ships would get you there within a month, and the pricier vessel may make the journey in as little as 20 days. Well, assuming the ship didn't get sunk by a tiger-striped Nautilus or something along the way. But he heard those were pretty much exterminated along major shipping routes, along with sea hydras, razor sharks and flying barracudas, so probably not. In any case, this was the method Zorian's parents were using to get to Koth, as they were not in that much of a hurry and didn't want to spend more money than they needed to. The second main method was utilizing the existing network of teleport platforms that connected most major settlements on Altazia and Mycena. It was pricier than ship travel, but that was not an issue for Zack and Zorian. A bigger problem was that while this method was faster than ship travel, it actually wasn't that much faster. Using publicly available information, Zorian calculated that it would take them 15 days to reach Koth by using the teleport platform network, and that was under ideal conditions. The issue was that the teleport platform network worked on a strict schedule that couldn't be sped up. The network spanned over numerous different countries after all, and none of them were willing to let mass teleport traffic go in and out of the country with no control or supervision. Each platform had security checks and border control that travelers had to go through, and that took time. A lot of time, according to Zack. He had already tried to use the platforms as a method of reaching Koth once, purely on a whim, and it actually took him most of the month to reach his destination. Would Zorian be able to do better? Doubtful. Even if Zorian offered to pay extra, the teleport operators would refuse to make an off-schedule platform activation just for his sake. Who would cause an international incident just for some extra cash? And even if Zorian went wild with his mind magic and convinced them to make an exception for him and Zack, the destination platform security would not be inclined to play along. Depending on the destination, they might even shoot him on sight. There had been cases where teleport platforms were used for raids and surprise attacks, and some places were very trigger-happy about unannounced teleports. All in all, Zorian didn't think he could optimize the teleport platform to any significant extent. They were a very fast and convenient method if one was traveling to a destination that was a couple of jumps away, but they just weren't designed to get people over vast distances as fast as they were willing to pay. If anything, the speed of transit was deliberately throttled to more manageable levels, so that the local authorities could exercise some measure of control over it. Unfortunately, there were no other routine methods for crossing such large distances. Not many absurdly rich people needed to get from Eldamar to Koth as fast as humanly possible in any given year, so no widespread service provided it. That left unconventional methods. Zorian had considered some wild ones, such as stealing one of the few existing airships to make the journey or transforming into a migratory bird and flying there, but ultimately dismissed them as too fanciful to really work. Besides, methods like that didn't solve the problem of losing access to Altazia's black rooms, and would require them to dedicate at least several restarts in pursuit of exotic skills that were unlikely to be useful for anything else. Being able to pilot an airship was good for bragging rights and not much else, unless you were actually an airship pilot by trade. Eventually, his thoughts turned to the gate spell and his recent practice of making heavy use of simulacrums. Probably because that was what he had been working on recently. By themselves, neither of the two spells was the solution to his problem, but combined together they could be. The simulacrum had no range limit as far as Zorian was aware. It had to be created next to the caster, but it could then roam as far away from the original as it wanted. The gate spell, on the other hand, was largely limited by its rather miserable range, unless there were people on both ends of the gate working in tandem to stabilize it. If there were people casting the spell on both ends of the gate, then it also didn't have a known range limit. In practice, the gate spell was rarely utilized in this way, both because people capable of casting the gate spell were as rare as hen's teeth and because actually coordinating two such people to synchronize their casting over large distances was hard. It was often quicker and more practical to simply chain teleports from place to place than to go through such a hassle. With the simulacrum spell, Zorian didn't have to worry about finding another person capable of casting the spell. He could effectively be two or more people at the same time. And while coordinating the spell over continental distances was a bit of an issue, it was not insurmountable. In the worst case, he could simply instruct his simulacrum to leave a trail of telepathic relays along its path and maintain contact that way. One nice thing about the idea was that while his simulacrum was traveling to Koth, he would be able to stay in Eldamar and wouldn't lose access to the black rooms in that particular restart. One not-so-nice thing was that this would permanently tie down one of his simulacrums, leaving one less for him to boss around. He could only maintain 3 simulacrums at most without his mana regeneration going negative, so that was not an entirely irrelevant cost. Additionally, that would require him to discard his previous rule about only allowing simulacrums to exist for 24 hours. However, he didn't really foresee much problems with that. His simulacrums had been really well behaved, all things considered. His current simulacrums could be kind of cranky and weird sometimes, but they were clearly him and had his best interests at heart. Still, maybe he should start considering some kind of countermeasure in case one of his simulacrums went rogue and tried to take over. But any countermeasure he designed his simulacrum would know about. Arg. In any case, that still left the question of how the simulacrum was going to reach Koth in a reasonable amount of time. It was nice that Zorian wasn't going to have to dedicate half a restart to such a journey and lose access to the black rooms, but the fact remained they would only have 15 or so days in each restart left to conduct a search for the key. He needed something better than that. That was why he decided to talk to the Silent Doorway adepts. It could turn out to be a massive waste of time, but if they really knew something about the operation of Bakura gates, that could be precisely the solution he needed. After all, why bother setting up a brand new gate network if one already existed and was largely unsupervised to boot? Thus, Zack and Zorian were currently standing in front of the Silent Doorway adept representative, Refuge in Void. She was a skittish little thing, twitching and shuffling in place all the time, acting way too nervous for a professional negotiator. Then again, how many humans interacted with Urania so heavily they learned how to read their body cues? Maybe it was Zorian who was weird. Surrounding them were 8 other Urania serving as guards. There were originally 4 of them, but the Silent Doorway adepts brought in another 4 once they realized what Zack and Zorian were after. The negotiations weren't going too well. "I am sorry, honored guests, but we really cannot help you with this," the Silent Doorway adept representative said, using a vocalization spell to speak out loud instead of resorting to their usual telepathy. She was either not very proficient in the spell or was trying to unnerve them with amateurish psychological warfare, because her voice was weirdly resonant and distorted. "The Bakura Gate in our possession is simply a treasured historical artifact. It has great sentimental value to us, but we know of no method to actually make it work." Her middle legs twitched slightly, an obvious nervous tic that plagued her since the very beginning of these talks. "But please," she added, trying her best to sound sincere, "if you find anything regarding the activation of Bakura gates, contact us immediately. We are as interested in this matter as you are." "I'm sure you are," said Zorian, clacking his tongue unhappily. They had tried just about everything they could think of to secure the web's cooperation on this. They had offered confidential information on surrounding polities, offered rare materials and money, offered knowledge of secret Iranian techniques they had gotten from the other webs in various restarts, and they had offered an utterly ridiculous amount of crystallized mana for it. It was all for naught. The Silent Doorway adepts remained obstinate in feigning ignorance on the matter. He exchanged a long look with Zack, who just shrugged in response. This meeting was largely Zorian's idea. Zack came to the meeting while under the effects of the mind blank spell and mostly remained silent, a fact that surely wasn't helping the Silent Doorway adepts relax around them. Still, that was the whole point. Zorian deliberately instructed Zack to do that as an unspoken intimidation attempt. He knew from his past dealings with the Silent Doorway adepts that merely being polite and generous wasn't going to accomplish anything, so he brought Zack along to show them he wasn't someone they could dismiss out of hand. In a way, it worked. Zorian was sure the web would have chased him off by now if he had come alone, but since there was a mind-blanked mage standing next to him, looking all grim and imposing, they remained polite and treated him far nicer than they did in the past. It was true what they say, negotiations tended to go better if you brought both gifts and an armed entourage as opposed to just gifts. Unfortunately, their host seemed to be running out of patience, as Zorian spotted some of the guards shifting their positions, as if preparing themselves for a surprise attack. "Please don't do that," he said with a sigh. "You have no chance against us in an actual fight. I'm sure you've noticed that my friend here is under a mind blank, and I assure you he's as good as you'd think. I am not that bad at fighting myself, if you'll permit me to be a little immodest, so don't discount me as a threat either. You would only be walking into your death if you attack us. Don't do this to yourself. If you are so confident in your combat prowess, why not just attack us and take what you want by force?" Refugin Void said. Perhaps it was just Zorian, but she sounded a little bitter to him. "Why negotiate with us at all?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Zorian told her matter-of-factly. "We're not brigands." "I see. So your friend here?" she asked, leaning slightly towards Zack, who raised his eyebrow at her curiously. "It's just a precaution," Zorian said. "Unless you attack me, this meeting will not degenerate into violence." Also, he was not at all sure he could figure out their secrets from reading their minds. The sort of knowledge about the gate he wanted was likely held by a small selection of their experts and maybe leaders, and they were liable to have protected it well. In the past, when Zack and Zorian raided Iranian webs, their elders had the annoying tendency to erase their own memories in regards to important secrets, rather than let them fall into their hands. Since the two of them hadn't been after their closest secrets back then, this had been a minor matter back then. Now though, it would be a giant showstopper. "In that case, I will be frank with you. We are not willing to divulge our secrets to you," Refugin Void said. "You're just wasting both of our time here." "At any price?" Zorian frowned. "I'm afraid so. I honestly can't think of anything you could offer us that would make us reveal our closest mysteries to you." Well, this was not unexpected. It was time to bring out his secret weapon then. "Let's test this with one last offer then," Zorian said. "Sure," Refugin Void said, projecting a mixture of relief and disinterest, as if she was just pleased this was about to end. "Me and Zack here are time travelers," Zorian said. "And we can help you send messages from your current selves to the Silent Doorway adepts in the past." There was a short pause as the Iranian representative froze for a second and then shook her forward legs in a strange gesture. "Well," she said, "I have to say this is the first time anyone has tried that argument. I find myself curious. Do you have any kind of proof for that statement?" 3 days from now, you are going to send a team of 3 Arania to an old contact in Tozan to pick up another shipment of crystallized mana," said Zorian, causing the representative to freeze again. "However, it will be a trap and 2 of them will never return." "That doesn't dash," Refugin Void started saying. 2 days after that," continued Zorian in a louder voice, cutting her off, "you will finally track down the red scrolls of Tmilisan, but your previous buyer will say he is no longer interested in them. He will instead point you to Padina's magical museum as a possible buyer. At the same time, you will come into possession of a box of Emberheart crystals." After Zorian made another 10 or so predictions, Refugin Void finally broke down and went to speak with her elders. An hour later, he was handed over to someone higher in the chain of command, specifically, Glittering River of Stars, who was some kind of vice elder as far as he could figure out. She was a lot less obstructive than Refugin Void had been, but still not willing to talk to him about Bakura Gates. "We will need some time to confirm these predictions of yours. I'm sure you understand," Glittering River said apologetically. He really sounded apologetic too. She was a much better actor than Refugin Void had been. "I understand," Zorian said, nodding slowly. "It's fine. We didn't really expect to get your cooperation after one attempt, anyway. But that's okay," Zack said with a sunny smile. "We have as many attempts to get this right as we want to." To her credit, Glittering River did not shift or twitch uncomfortably as Refugin Void had been prone to, but Zorian could tell she was uncomfortable anyway. They had explained to her the general nature of the time loop they were in, but neglected to mention some important details, such as that they were on a time limit or just how crucial Bakura Gate information might be to them. Zorian wasn't sure how much the Silent Doorway adepts really believed about their story, but they were clearly spooked enough by the implications to humor him for a bit. "Incidentally, if there is a way for me to prove my claims easier to your web in future restarts, I'd love to hear it, Zorian said. We will have to discuss things before I get back to you on that, Glittering River said diplomatically. After that, they were basically ejected out of the colony and told to come back in a week. Considering that Zorian had been afraid they would laugh them straight out of the room the moment they mentioned time travel, he considered this already a victory. So long as they didn't reject the idea out of hand, he was sure they could prove to them that the time loop was real. They may not have literally infinite retries like they had implied to Glittering River, but what they did have should be more than enough. We seem to have frightened them pretty badly there, Zack commented on the way back to Cyoria. Especially when you started mentioning the deals you've made with other webs and how you intend to repay them after you get out of the time loop. You'd think they'd be happy about their fellow webs being rewarded, but apparently not. The last time one of the Iranian webs got massively superior to others, they swept over the entire continent, conquering or supplanting every rival colony in the way, Zorian pointed out. They've got every right to be worried. I hadn't thought of it that way, Zack said thoughtfully. I mean, you've already told me that, but I just hadn't considered how that would affect their attitudes. It's good I left the negotiations mostly to you then. You really understand Iranian psychology way better than I do. There was a short silence before Zack spoke again. So, do you really intend to just hand down knowledge to other webs like that? He asked curiously. Of course, Zorian nodded. Not to every single web I interacted with, admittedly, but every web that has been especially helpful to me is bound to get something for their trouble. What about help of the human variety? Zack asked. Do they get any repayment? That's a bit more dangerous since they are far more likely to track me down through my gifts than the Urania. I want to pay people back for their help, but I don't want to suffer just because I have a sense of honor, said Zorian. Yeah, some people are really shameless, Zack agreed. Give them a finger and they'll try to bite off the whole arm. And some might just be too curious for their own good. Yeah, Zorian nodded. I intend to try and repay people anyway, but I'll have to be a lot more careful and selective about it. Makes me feel a little guilty, Zack admitted. I don't think I've ever seriously considered paying people back for things I got from them over the restarts. Invite me when you start finalizing those plans, okay? I think I have a few people I should really reward somehow for all the good they've done to me. Sure, Zorian nodded. So, Zack continued. The Silent Doorway adepts. Do you think their leadership will believe us in the end? Maybe. But even if they do, it's no guarantee that they'll agree to a trade, Zorian said, shaking his head sadly. If they're paranoid enough, any deal with us might seem like shooting themselves in the foot. They have no way to make sure we're actually going to keep our end of the bargain once we're outside the time loop. Who's to say we won't just pump them for every secret they have and then unceremoniously discard them? You know, like the ghost serpent thought we would do to it. Zack made a sour face. He didn't like to be reminded of the snake spirit. He had been severely insulted by its accusations, taking them much more personally than Zorian himself did. In any case, Zorian continued, even if these negotiations fail, it's not the end of the world. There is at least one other group that seems to have insight into how Bakura gates work. There is a fully functional gate mechanism beneath Cyoria, courtesy of the invaders, and it's supposed to be heavily inspired by Bakura gates. None of the Abasins know how that thing works, pointed out Zack. I bet only Quatakikal really does. So that doesn't really help us much. Yeah, probably, Zorian agreed. He had delved into the minds of enough high-ranking invaders to realize that the gates probably weren't made by any of them. Either Quatakikal was the only one who knew the secrets of their construction, or the other builders weren't allowed to be part of the invasion force. It would make sense if it were so. The gates were one huge advantage for the Abasins, and they definitely didn't want that secret to fall into the hands of Eldamar's mages. But I wasn't thinking of finding someone to memory probe for the information. I was thinking of simply taking over the gate site and analyzing the gate scaffolding itself. Zack raised an eyebrow at him. I thought you said that would take months, he asked curiously. Maybe years. What changed? I realized I was being kind of an idiot, Zorian said. Sure, it would take a long time if I tried to figure it out all alone. But why do that? Why not bring a small army of experts down there and have us all tackle it together? Zack hummed thoughtfully. It would have to be done very, very carefully unless we want Quatakikal to come crashing to the party, he said. But then again, that's true for anything involving the invasion, isn't it? Yeah, it's worth a try. Let's do it. We'll wait for the day of the invasion, Sorian said hurriedly. He could see Zack was getting fired up and he would rather not go get himself killed in the middle of the restart due to his impatience. The security of the gate is laughable if you time things right. Oh right, you did mention that, Zack said, deflating a little. Man, I feel so angry at myself for never figuring that out before you told me. I never did manage to step through the gate myself, you know? Even when I was fast enough in carving my way through the defenders to avoid Quatakikl showing up to get rid of me, the defenders always collapsed the gate before I reached it. I still can't believe you just made a direct frontal assault on the Abasin base instead of trying to infiltrate it, Sorian said. Why the hell did you think that would work? I'm not good at infiltration, Zack said with an unrepentant shrug. Besides, it almost did work. It's not stupid if it works, right? They spent the rest of the journey home arguing about whether or not there is any difference between almost worked and ultimately failed. Break. What do you mean I have a date with Akoja? Sorian asked his simulacrum incredulously. Just what I said, the simulacrum said, unconcerned with his agitation. She asked me to meet her in that little tea house 2 blocks from the academy and I accepted. Sorian felt the urge to throw a lightning bolt at his damn simulacrum, but he knew that wouldn't actually help him feel any better. If anything, it would just complicate things further by denying him much-needed answers as to how could this happen. You can't just decide things like this on your own. Sorian hissed to his simulacrum in frustration. The simulacrum arched his eyebrow at him. Well, it's true, Sorian insisted. I know you're my simulacrum and I told you to do whatever, but you should have contacted me for opinion before agreeing to something like this. Are you saying that if you had been in my place, you would have blown her off when she asked to meet? His simulacrum asked with a knowing smile. Sorian frowned. If this were before the time loop? Yeah, definitely. No, not a chance. He wasn't interested in dating Akoja. He didn't think their personalities meshed well, but he'd give her a chance at least. He hated that goddamned smirk that was on his simulacrum's face right now, but he was right that Sorian would have likely made the same decision in his place. This is just Sorian started before stopping himself with a sigh. When? 2 days from now, the simulacrum said. How the hell did this happen? Sorian asked. I knew Akoja was kind of crushing on me, but she never tried anything until now. What changed? What did you do? Actually, she did set up a meeting with you once, remember? His simulacrum said. Only she chickened out at the end and nothing came of it. But I doubt it's going to be like that this time, since she set up an actual date for it and all. Anyway, I didn't do anything, it's your previous simulacrums that did. What do you mean? Sorian frowned. He'd been doing a lot of frowning ever since this conversation started. Apparently they've been pretty active among our classmates without telling you. They're hanging out with all sorts of people and then leaving out that detail when making their final reports. In particular, they've been interacting with Akoja heavily enough that she apparently felt confident enough to ask me out. Before dismissing a simulacrum, Sorian always made sure to ask it for a memory packet of everything important that had occurred to it during its short life. This was usually accompanied by a verbal report, since Sorian found it useful to chat with his simulacrums from time to time to see how they're faring. This did mean he had to rely on the simulacrums being able to effectively summarize their existence for him, but there was no real alternative. If he asked the simulacrums for memories of their entire existence, he would never be able to digest the memory packets in any reasonable amount of time. Interpreting 24 hours of memories, no matter how mundane, would take him at least a couple of hours. And he usually had more than one simulacrum active at the time. He could only rely on his simulacrums to pick what they felt was important and pass it on. Why would they do that? Sorian asked. No idea. But if I were to guess, because it's kind of funny to imagine your reaction when you finally find out, his simulacrum said, grinning. I'm certainly amused at your predicament. My predicament, huh? Sorian said slowly, giving the simulacrum a nasty look. Actually, I have a better idea. You are going to do it. But I'm going to go away at the end of the day, the simulacrum said, confused. Not anymore, Sorian said. I've been thinking of relaxing the 24-hour rule and you're going to be the first test subject. Congratulations, you're going to remain active for more than a day, just so you can take responsibility for what you've done. Hey, the simulacrum protested. Wait just a minute here. Don't you think it's kind of an asshole move to send a simulacrum on a date instead of you? Why? Sorian asked with a malicious smile. You're the one she spoke to, so it's only fair that you be the one to do it. As well. I'm still just made of ectoplasm and we're meeting in a tea house, the simulacrum said. I'll probably be expected to drink something and I kind of can't. I'm totally solid and homogeneous from the neck down. He didn't know that. He knew that simulacrums had to sleep just as well as he did, because he tried to leave one to work overnight once and found it snoring on the floor in the morning. As for things like food and water, he'd never really thought about it. The spell description on the scroll said a simulacrum didn't need any sustenance besides magic, so he didn't think there was anything there to worry about. You know what? Zorian sighed. You're right. I should be the one going if only for Akoja's sake. Right. I'm glad you can see reason, the simulacrum said, clearly relieved. However, Zorian added with louder voice. That doesn't mean you're completely off the hook. You remember what I said earlier? No, the simulacrum said slowly. I said I was thinking of relaxing the 24-hour rule, Zorian patiently reminded him. That still applies and you're still going to be a test rat for that. He quickly gathered all the maps, brochures and partially filled out information tables and unceremoniously thrusted them at the simulacrum. Congratulations, Zorian said blandly. You just earned yourself a one-way ticket to Koth. Your job, which you have no option but to accept, is to find a way to cross more than 7,000 kilometers in less than a week. Good luck. Oh, come on, the simulacrum protested. That's impossible and you know it. Hey, come back here. But Zorian wasn't listening. He had less than 2 days to figure out what kind of nonsense his previous simulacrums had set up for him. Beside the current situation with Akoja, that is. Break. The small, out-of-the-way tea house Zorian and Akoja were currently in had a bit of a reputation among students. Not all of them. Before the time loop, Zorian had no idea it even existed. But among the more relationship-focused students of the academy, this place was famous as a good place for a romantic meetup. As such, there was no doubt in Zorian's mind what Akoja was trying to say when she asked him if he wanted to meet with her here. The fact she picked this place in particular made it pretty clear she was expressing romantic interest in him. The date had gone well in Zorian's opinion. Neither Zorian nor Akoja were very talkative people, so most of the time passed in awkward silence. Still, they did chat a little and he didn't make Akoja run off in tears or storm off angrily out of the tea house. Considering how his previous evening with Akoja had gone, this was a massive success. He gulped down the last dregs of his tea, which had gone thoroughly cold by now, and took a good look at Akoja. She looked away shyly, projecting a mixture of discomfort and excitement in response to his attention. She was a thin girl with short brown hair and expensive-looking glasses. The clothes she wore were fancier than she usually had on her, but still very conservative and modest. All muted colors and not a bit of extra skin visible anywhere. She wasn't a classical beauty, but he'd still describe her as kind of attractive. Especially when she was blushing and being shy like she was right now. She was so hard to figure out. Yes, she was kind of crushing on him, but he was pretty sure there was more to it than that. Out of concern for her privacy, he had refrained from peeking at her surface thoughts and limited himself to what his passive empathy was telling him. The more the date progressed, the more certain he became that she wanted to bring some topic up to his attention, but somehow she always backed down before she went through it. What was that about? He thought about calling her on it but was reluctant to do so. Things were going pretty well thus far, so why risk ruining things? Besides, if this thing was actually important to her, she would surely summon the courage to bring it up eventually. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Akoja suddenly said, straightening herself a little. Can I ask you something? Yes, go ahead, Zorian nodded. I know that you don't get along all that well with your family, she said before stopping to study his reaction. Oh boy. No wonder she was so reluctant to bring this up, whatever it was. If she were to start a conversation like that with the pre-time loop Zorian, it would be treading on very dangerous waters. Now though, well, Zorian liked to believe he had progressed a little since those days, so he just motioned her to continue. Anyway, she continued hurriedly, you kind of indicated that you want to become independent because of that. Find a high-paying job somewhere, get yourself a home and such. Zorian gave her a curious look. I was wondering if you could give me advice in that regard, she finally asked. How to achieve your own independence? Zorian asked. Yes, she confirmed quickly. Why? He asked curiously. I thought you got along great with your family. I do, she said. We're pretty close to each other and I have no problems with them. I'm fortunate that way. Just, I don't really have a good relationship with anyone else. Zorian was about to say something before she cut him off. Except for the teachers I know, she added, giving him a warning look. But they don't really care about the students half as much as they pretend to. Especially not students of average talents like mine, who come from a non-magical background and only have their work ethics to lean on. Zorian hummed thoughtfully, not really understanding what she was getting at. As for Akoja herself, she remained silent and thoughtful for a few seconds, and Zorian got the impression she was thinking of how to explain things further. Thus, he simply waited and refrained from interrupting her. Did you ever get the impression that the academy was just milking us for cash? She finally asked. Zorian reeled back a little, caught off guard by the question. Did he think that? Well, there were plenty of things he felt they were doing wrong, but... No, not really, he admitted. Sorry. Why do you think so? Well, until the Splinter Wars and Weeping thinned out the number of noble houses and other respectable sources of students, the Scioria's Royal Academy of Magical Arts didn't even think of allowing people like us, with no prominent ancestry, into its halls. I'm pretty sure we're only here because the Academy was faced with a choice of either cutting costs or accepting riffraff in for money. And picked money in the end, of course. Ah, Zorian said. Yes, you're probably right there. But I wouldn't describe that as milking us for money, personally. Maybe I'm just getting paranoid, Akoja sighed. I'm getting a bit disappointed in Academy staff these days. Anyway, the point is that I'm not sure how useful the Academy diploma is going to be for me. My family paid a lot of money for me to be here and they expect great things from me in the future. When I had just come here, I thought that if I just tried my best in class and excelled, that it would all work out. Now I'm not so sure. And I don't want to go back to my family and beg for help. They'd help me, I know. But I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to be a burden. So you're hoping I can give you some advice in how to find a well-paying job, affordable housing and so on, Zorian finished. Before the time loop, it was unlikely that Zorian would have been able to advise her much. At the end of the day, his idea was quite similar to her own. Excel in your studies and everything would hopefully work itself out in the end. They just had a slightly different definition of what constitutes excelling. Now, though, he actually could recommend a few places to her. He had checked out the employment opportunities a couple of times, though by that point he had been severely overqualified for most of them and had abandoned the project in disappointment. Still, he felt that it was actually smarter of her to forget about that for now and focus on excelling in her magic studies, though perhaps in a slightly more focused manner. Just pick one field of magic and focus the bulk of your effort there, he said. I'd normally suggest spell formula since being good at those is very well paid, but I noticed you don't like math much, so maybe not. How do you feel about alteration? It's fine, I guess, she shrugged. Try focusing on that then, he suggested. It's one of the better paying fields. Plus, Ilsa is a master of that type of magic and she seems to like you, so you might be able to get some help out of her with that as your focus. I see, she said, looking thoughtful. Also, I'm pretty good at alteration, he noted. I might be able to give you a bit of help if he gets stuck with it. Actually, he would be able to help her with just about any field of magic. But it would sound stupidly boastful to say that, so best to be a little modest about his self-praise. There is a long pause as Akoja digested all this and fiddled nervously with her teacup. So, Zorian said, ending the silence. Was this all? She mumbled, broken out of her reverie. She looked panicked for a moment. Oh, well, yes. I guess. I see, Zorian said. That's a bit of a shame. When you asked us to meet here, I thought you were actually asking me out on a date. It's not. It was part of the whole she stammered. Relax, I'm just joking with you, he said with a light laugh. Jerk, she huffed. But, I kind of do like you. I have to be honest here. I'm not really interested in relationships right now, he told her bluntly. So long as he was stuck in the time loop, he had no intention of pursuing a relationship with anyone. I know this sounds a little heartless, but... I understand, she sighed, sagging a little. A surprisingly level-headed reaction to a rejection. Since you're being so honest, tell me straight. Do I have any chance at all with you? I don't know, Zorian admitted. We're so different from each other. How so? She asked, sounding more curious than insulted. We seem quite similar from where I'm standing. Well, you're far more concerned about rules and reputation than I am for one thing, Zorian said. She gave him an exasperated look. I'd have to be blind to not notice that you don't care about propriety to the same extent I do, she said. Yet I still like you. Surely that means I'm willing to work with you on it, right? Work with me or work on trying to change me? Zorian wanted to ask. He could be wrong, but he got the impression that Akoja saw him less as his own person and more as raw material to turn into something more to her liking. But no, that would be too confrontational and the date would only go downward from there. So he just glossed over her question and moved on. Despite him refusing to become an item with her, the date ended pretty amiably from there. Perhaps because he didn't categorically refuse her and she still thought she might have a chance with him? Whatever the case, they agreed to meet again next week in a more neutral location, ostensibly so Zorian could give her the material he gathered about potential places of employment, costs of living in different cities and so on. He didn't know what to think of the whole thing in the end. When he heard his simulacrums had set him up on a date with Akoja, he thought this could only end badly. In his opinion, he and Akoja were very incompatible with one another. After today's meeting, though, he could almost see it working out in the end. He so didn't need this right now. Well, could be worse, he supposed. His simulacrums could have set him up with Nialu instead. He had found out that she was also someone they had befriended over the course of the current restart, for whatever reason, and a sneak peek at her thoughts told him she wasn't exactly opposed to getting involved with him. If he had ended up on a date with her, everyone in the academy would have known about it by the end of the day. At least Akoja had some sense of discretion. Thankfully, Nialu was kind of traditional in mindset and would never ask someone out the way Akoja did. She would expect a guy to make the first move. He was going to have to supervise simulacrums he sent on boring tasks like going to class a lot closer in the future. Break. You have got to be kidding me, simulacrum number 2 said incredulously. 500 silver coins just for a teleport to Xixiao? Do you think I grow money on trees or something? The man he was talking to, a bald, heavily tattooed man in his 40s, simply scowled at him in response. No like can get lost, he told Zorian in broken Icosian. The simulacrum sighed in frustration and walked away. The original might be swimming in cash right now, but he wasn't. There was only so much money he could take with him when he left Eldamar, so he couldn't afford to be too profligate with his funds. This was especially true because every country had its own currency, so he couldn't just bring stacks of paper money to pay people with. Eldamar's paper bills weren't worth much outside Altazia. Hell, they weren't worth much in some places in Altazia either. One of the tiny statelets he visited hated Eldamar so much he had nearly gotten attacked when he tried to pay a mage with their money. No, if he wanted to complete his journey, he needed to carry things that had more universal value: gold, silver and gems. And since those things were both heavy and fairly bulky, he could only bring so much with him. Simulacrum number 2 grumbled to himself discontentedly. When he had started his journey, he was so sure he had thought of a genius solution. If the teleport platform network was too slow and inconvenient, he thought, why not just find teleport-capable mages and pay them to teleport him personally? Combined with an occasional teleport of his own when he couldn't find anyone willing to provide this service, and he felt the idea of getting to Koth in less than a week might not be so crazy after all. Well, it was a little harder than that. First of all, he had a somewhat skewed image of how common teleport-capable mages were. Especially mages that could teleport over large distances and could bring other people with them. These kind of people were very rare, and could only be reliably found in large cities and other places where mages naturally congregate. In addition, not every such mage was a heavy traveler, and often had an extremely limited selection of places they could teleport to. Finally, on top of all that, accepting Zorian's deal was technically illegal dodging of border checks. Some mages wouldn't do it at all because of it, or charged very steep prices for their services. But still, despite all these issues, the plan had been working fairly well so long as he was still traveling through Altazia. Once he entered the Shirvan archipelago and the Zlotic states, though, another problem with the idea made itself known. He didn't speak the local language. Zorian knew 3 languages: the common Icosian that was spoken throughout Altazia in various dialects, the local Kusky tongue that peasantry around Sirin used in their daily lives, and the High Icosian that was used in scholarly works and international trade. Even among mages, fluency in High Icosian was not common. Thus, if Zorian wanted to question people for information and negotiate, he often had to resort to common Icosian. The worked out pretty well in Altazia, but quickly became a big headache outside of it. It was true that both the Shirvan archipelago and the Zlotic states were once part of the Icosian Empire, but while these places spoke common Icosian, this was such an alien dialect of Icosian, at least to Zorian's ears, that he could barely understand them. Additionally, many of these places were like Zorian's own home region, in that many of the regular inhabitants spoke mainly in their own native tongue and only knew the smattering of common Icosian for use in trade and such. The Icosian Empire may have conquered these places and forced the Icosian language to be used by the administration, but local languages were still there beneath it all. This was especially true in Shirvan archipelago, where every damn island seemed to have its own local language and dialect. He thought that was bad, but as he traveled ever southward along the coast of Mycena, he realized this problem was only going to get worse. Koth had never been successfully conquered by Icosia, due to being separated from northern Mycena by a giant desert, much smaller in those times but still present, and an imposing mountain range that cut the continent nearly in half. As a consequence, they spoke completely alien tongues that Zorian couldn't understand in the slightest. On top of that, the further south he went, the darker the people's skin tone became, and the more exotic their facial features got in comparison to his own. People recognized him as a weird stranger on sight, and were intensely suspicious of him the moment he approached them. The area he was currently in was especially bad, because it was very sparsely populated and the settlement he was in was the only congregation of mages for several hundred kilometers around, and the people inside it knew it. Which was why they were trying to bleed him dry whenever he tried to purchase their services. Well, it could be worse. He could still be attending classes at the academy for one. Now that would have been a real nightmare. He did wonder how the original's date with Ikoja went, though. He would have to pester the original for details again when he contacted him for his daily report. Chapter 065. Dangerous Ground. Far to the north of Scioria, square in the middle of a heavily forested mountain range, there was a secluded valley devoid of any vegetation. Instead, it was covered in sharp, broken rocks of all shapes and sizes. There was no obvious reason for the place to be so lifeless and desolate, especially considering how verdant the surrounding mountains were. As he stood on a cliff overlooking the valley, Zorian wondered about that. Was the valley so rocky and desolate because of what made its home here? Or was it the other way around and the valley's inhabitants had picked it precisely because it was so suitable for themselves? Probably the former, but one could never quite know. There could be some subtle geomantic magic surrounding the place. Zorian, Zack said, interrupting his thoughts. The view is nice, I guess. Feel like rocks or something. But why the hell are we here exactly? You have no appreciation for nature's wonders, Zorian sighed. Assuming this was actually a natural wonder, that is, and not something the earth elementals had done to make their home more comfy for themselves anyway. You were with me when we talked to that hunter community a few hours ago, weren't you? Yes, Zack nodded. You told them we're searching for elementals and they sent us here. Which is fine and all, but why are we searching for elementals all of the sudden? You should know by now that I really hate the whole mysterious act. If you don't start explaining things right now, I'm starting a wrestling match with you right here on the edge of this cliff. Zorian gave him an incredulous look before pointing at the sharp, spike-like rocks at the bottom of the cliff. Don't think for a second I won't, Zack warned. One restart cut short is a small price to pay if it will teach you not to do this crap anymore. It wasn't anything sinister, Zorian sighed. It's just that it's a pretty crazy idea and I didn't want to bother you with it. I did say you could sit this one out, didn't I? You forget who you're talking to, Zack smiled widely. I'm the guy who fought the most infamous dragon of our time just to see if I could do it, descended as deep into the dungeon as I could before dying and took on the entire basin invasion force all by myself. I'm no stranger to crazy ideas. True, Zorian said. Besides, Zack said, sounding more serious this time, we're in this together. Stop trying to do things alone, it's getting seriously annoying. Fine, I get it, said Zorian, raising his hands up in defeat. Look, the point of all this is to try and find where the other primordials are imprisoned. What? Zack asked incredulously. We're having so many problems with this Panicseth thing and you want to find more? Yes, Zorian nodded. Well, maybe. As I said, it's a pretty crazy idea. I was thinking I might need to set loose a primordial into the world, and I realized that doing that with Panicseth wouldn't be a good idea. Panicseth's prison is in the middle of Scioria, and too much attention is already on it. So I thought, why don't I find my own primordial then? One that is in some isolated place where nobody is going to disturb us while we work. Zack looked at him like he just declared he was secretly a shape-shifted dragon and started sprouting horns. You did this on purpose, didn't you? He asked. What? Described the idea in the most disturbing possible way. Saurian asked back with a smirk. Yeah. He shook his head. It's true, though, that's essentially what I was thinking about. Why though? Zack asked. Is this about finding a way for you to leave the time loop? Saurian looked at his fellow time traveler in surprise. Don't be so surprised, Zack scoffed. You already told me how space itself seemed to collapse when Panic-Seth tried to leave his prison. It's natural to wonder if that kind of spatial hole could be used to fashion some kind of passage out of this place. I've thought of it too. Admittedly, I have no idea how you could actually go about doing that. Neither do I, Saurian admitted. But it's the only thing I could think of. Zack hummed thoughtfully. I thought you said the restart immediately collapsed when Panic-Seth got out of his prison though, he said. Last I spoke to you, you thought Panic-Seth getting out of his box was one of the conditions for terminating the time loop. Did you change your mind about that, or do you have a way around that? It's obvious the time loop can be fooled in many ways, Saurian said. As such, I thought that maybe if we enclose the area in a pocket dimension and then release the primordial, the time loop might not detect that as a breach. Why do you, oh? Zack said, eyes widening as he realized what Saurian was getting at. Because the primordial is still technically imprisoned. It would have to breach the pocket dimension we created before the time loop would consider it freed. That's the idea, Saurian said with a nod. Would the primordial have any trouble doing that, though? Zack asked with a frown. I doubt we could make a prison anywhere near as strong as these divinely crafted prisons that are currently holding them. We could always layer multiple pocket dimensions around ourselves, said Saurian. At least I hope. I don't know how pocket dimensions work, but they can obviously be stacked on top of each other to some extent. Otherwise, the time loop wouldn't be able to recreate the various pocket dimensions scattered around the world. You know, this raises an important question, Zack said. Where are we going to find someone to teach us how to make pocket dimensions? I mean, that's one of the rarest magical disciplines out there. I don't think I've ever encountered a mage that can create one. I admit I haven't been looking for those secrets very hard, but still. What's worse, you're talking about pocket dimension creation of incredible scale and sophistication. We need someone who is incredibly good at this obscure magical skill, not someone who can barely do it. Finding such a person. I think this could be even harder than gathering all of the pieces of the key. Saurian patiently listened to Zack's concerns, nodding slightly from time to time. It was all so very true. And yet, I'm pretty sure I already know a mage that is very good at creating and manipulating pocket dimensions, Saurian said. What? Who? Zack demanded. Silverlake, Saurian said, sighing heavily. He really didn't want to admit he needed her, but... The crazy witch lady that sent you to kill the Grey Hunter? Zack asked incredulously. The same, Saurian confirmed. Think about it. Why else can't we locate her damn hut? I refuse to believe her wards are good enough to resist a systematic sweep of the whole area from both of us. It's just not possible. And she isn't editing our memories either. Unless she is a godlike mind mage that makes even Arania elders look like children in comparison, I would at least be able to tell my mind had been tampered with after the fact. You think she hides her hut inside a pocket dimension? Zack asked. I don't see what else it could be, Saurian said. Huh. Well, I guess we better find a way to get those stupid eggs soon then, Zack said with a careless shrug. As if that would be the end of it. Saurian had a suspicion that even if they brought Silverlake the eggs, this would just be the start of their headaches with her. Regardless, this was the end of that topic for a while. After a short discussion of the best route to take through the rocky labyrinth, they used a flight spell to float down the cliff and onto one of the bigger rocky outcroppings jutting from the valley. From there, they decided to conserve mana by trying to advance on foot. Also, the hunters claimed that the earth elementals did not appreciate people flying over their home and would hurl rocks at people who offended them in such a way. An hour later, they realized they had taken the place too lightly. The landscape held no predators trying to ambush them, but it was exceptionally hard and dangerous to traverse on foot. The ground was rough and uneven, with a labyrinthine arrangement of ridges and rocky outcroppings, and it was often far less solid than it appeared to be at first glance. A careless step could easily result in it crumbling away beneath one's foot, with disastrous consequences. The stones of the valley were very angular and sharp, and sometimes even shaped like knives and caltrops, so any falls or imbalanced flailing easily led to serious injury. Neither Zorian nor Zack ended up injured, but it did make their progress terribly slow and miserable. Ugh, Zack said, casually firing a weak disintegration wave at the nearby rock in order to smooth it out a bit. Once all the edges and spikes were gone, he sat down on the stone and gave Zorian a long look. I must say those hunters we talked to have quite a penchant for understatements. When they said the elementals were a bit tricky to reach, I expected something easier than this. Well, they've been living in these mountains for months, Zorian said. Maybe for them this is just tricky rather than a hard slog. But yeah, this is getting a little ridiculous. At this rate it will take us a whole day to reach the center. So, do we just fly there or what? Zack offered. The hunters said the elementals fire on people flying over their home, Zorian said, shaking his head. I know we could probably survive their barrage, but we're here to ask for their advice. We don't want to piss them off before the talks even begin. Let me try something. Having said that, Zorian quickly fished out a brilliant red potion out of his backpack and downed it. Grey hunters had amazing senses. The most prominent of these, of course, was their ability to sense magic, but that was actually just the tip of the iceberg in regards to a Grey hunter's ability to perceive the environment. By now, Zack and Zorian had figured out that Grey hunters also had an incredibly acute ability to sense air currents and the vibrations in the ground. Together with their amazing magic perception and other, more mundane senses, it gave Grey hunters an almost omniscient awareness of everything in their immediate vicinity. The potions of Grey hunter perception that Zack and Zorian had been creating in recent restarts mostly ignored all of these in favor of focusing on the Grey hunter's magic perception. This was both because they were treading new ground and had to prioritize, but also because even if they could condense the totality of Grey hunter's perception inside a single potion, it was doubtful that either of them could process the information without blacking out. Recently, though, Zorian had decided to experiment a little with the tremor sense part of the Grey hunter's perception and commissioned a potion that would grant this ability from the alchemist they were working with. That was the potion he had just drunk, and this was going to be its first real field test. About 10 seconds after he drank the potion, Zorian felt his skin tingle before his awareness expanded. It was muted at first, but that changed quickly the moment Zorian took a step forward. He felt his foot hit the ground in a way he never had before, and the alien sensation almost brought him to the ground right then and there. A strong, vivid pulse emanated from his foot, spreading itself through the rocky labyrinth around him before being reflected back at him. In less than a second he had a three-dimensional map of his surroundings impressed into his mind. Give me a few minutes to get used to this, he told Zack. After 15 minutes of pacing back and forth and jumping in place, Zorian was reasonably sure he could crudely interpret what his new sense was telling him. However, even this, which was probably just a shadow of what the real Grey hunter was capable of, should allow him to effortlessly navigate through the valley. He motioned for Zack to follow him and they restarted their journey towards the elemental's home. Travel was very fast this time. Every step that Zack and Zorian took sent vivid pulses through the ground around them, mapping their surroundings in Zorian's mind and allowing him to identify which ground was too unstable to support their weight. Zorian felt this was probably how the Grey hunter always managed to detect buried traps that Zorian had tried to snare it with, even if they were totally non-magical. Every time it performed one of its damn jumps, the shockwaves generated by its landing would pulse through the ground around it, informing it of not just the layout of the ground around it, but also of its contents. But that was a thought for another time, because it wasn't long before they had finally reached the place they had been looking for. They knew they had reached it because the rocks around them crumbled to pieces and 6 earth elementals stepped out of them to block their path. They were a diverse bunch. One was a huge boulder with 4 stubby legs and a pair of massive rocky arms that could probably crush both of them to paste with a single hand swipe. The other was a 6-legged cat lizard, something carved out of shiny stone, its knife-like scales bristling at their intrusion. The third was a giant elongated human head, soundlessly bobbing up and down through the ground, which rippled and flowed like water in its presence. The fourth was an incredibly lifelike obsidian centipede, looking more like an actual monster than an elemental spirit. The fifth and sixth earth elementals, though, were clearly the leaders of the bunch. Both of them were around 3.5 meters tall, fairly humanoid in appearance and armed with actual metal weaponry that looked human-made rather than formed out of stone and the like. One of them had a muscular-looking figure and 4 faces arranged around its head, and carried in its hands a massive sword. The other looked like an old man with a beard made out of knife-like stones and a long whip-like tail trailing behind him. This one carried a huge mace in his hands, waving it in the air menacingly. After a few tense seconds, the 4-faced elemental stepped forward towards them. "Forbidden," he told them simply. Zorian kind of expected the elemental's voice to be all booming and gravely, considering its size and composition, but it was actually very crisp and spoken at normal volume. "We bring gifts," Zorian countered, bringing out a box out of his jacket pocket and showing the contents to the giant elemental in front of him. Zack proceeded to do the same. The boxes held a pair of fist-sized red stones, glowing with inner light. The so-called Dragon Heart stones were highly coveted by some magical creatures, including earth elementals. These stones were hard to acquire as they could only be found deep within the dungeon as a rule, and humans had no real use for them aside from making expensive jewelry and trading them to creatures that coveted them. Thankfully, Zack had encountered an entire cave full of them at one point, so it was simple enough to acquire some. The moment the earth elementals saw the stones, they quickly changed their tune. The lesser elementals around them tried to scuttle over to have a closer look, but the 2 leaders quickly caused them to stay back with a few menacing movements. After that, the 4-faced elemental spoke again limiting himself to a single word. "Come," he said simply. The 4 lesser elementals stayed behind, while the 2 humanoid giants led them to one of the large rock formations that turned out to be hollow. Inside, they found an interior that wouldn't look terribly out of place in a human dwelling. There were tables, chairs, shelves, cabinets, and even some potted plants. Items of obviously human making were scattered throughout the area, some of them hopelessly broken. Zorian assumed they were battle trophies to warn and awe human visitors against treachery, but it was hard to be sure. Spirits were notorious for having very alien sense of aesthetics, so maybe the elementals just found the arrangement pleasing to the eye somehow. In the back of the chamber, opposite of the entrance, stood the elemental they came here to see. Stonechild, the elder elemental. Zorian didn't know what he had expected to see. A massive stone monolith with a giant face carved in it? A miniature mountain? A larger version of the humanoid elementals that escorted them to this place? What he definitely didn't expect was to find himself facing what appeared to be a 10-year-old boy. And not one that was crudely carved out of stone, either. Stonechild's form was incredibly lifelike and realistic, and he looked like nothing more than a real human child, if one whose skin was a bit browner than was common this far to the north. There was only one thing hinting at Stonechild's elemental nature. His eyes were solid black, devoid of any internal structure a real human eye should have. It was as if someone set out to make a flawless human replica but then ran out of patience in the end and decided to just socket a pair of polished black gems into the eye sockets and call it a day. "Welcome," Stonechild said, his voice steady and very natural sounding. He smiled reassuringly at them. "We don't get many visitors here, so my manners are a little rusty and I have little to offer you with. I apologize in advance for my poor hospitality. Would you like a glass of water?" Zack and Zorian glanced at each other uncertainly. It was not quite how they had imagined the great elder elemental would behave towards them. "I could go for a glass of water, yeah," Zack said with a shrug. Stonechild nodded to himself in satisfaction and walked over to a nearby shelf, which held several ceramic jugs and a collection of glass containers of various sorts. Stonechild picked up what was clearly a pickle jar at first, but then hesitated for a moment before putting it back on the shelf. He then picked up a proper drinking glass instead. Zorian watched as the elder elemental went about pouring Zack a glass of water, shifting in place nervously. Strange as it may sound, Stonechild worried him a lot more than the 2 hulking elemental guards that stood vigilantly by the entrance of this place. He didn't look as imposing as them, but his appearance was a dangerous sign all on its own. It was well known that when it came to spirits, the more human-like they were, the more wary one had to be around them. Not necessarily because that made them more powerful, but because it meant they understood humans well enough to pretend to be one. This understanding, in turn, meant they could counter, fight, and manipulate humans in a way their more ignorant fellows could not. Stonechild's understanding of human mentality and culture made him a lot more dangerous than he would be if he was just a bit more powerful than your average Earth elemental. It was interesting to see this kind of an elemental here in total wilderness, though. Elementals were some of the most ancient spirits known to man, but also one of the most alien and incomprehensible. The vast majority of them couldn't even speak in a human comprehensible manner, never mind understand human logic and attitudes. This inability of human and elementals to understand one another, coupled with the fact that elementals often occupied land that humans coveted and that elementals typically reacted to provocations by attacking any human within reach, most elementals had trouble telling human individuals apart from one another, led to many bitter conflicts between the two groups in the past. Elementals that understood humanity to the level that Stonechild did were vanishingly rare and usually involved the elemental in question allying itself to a human community for several generations. Most of them served as protector spirits of various houses or brokered some kind of trade deal with the local authorities in exchange for being left alone. For Stonechild to live in this kind of isolated location, away from any significant human community, yet still know so much about them, it was weird. Zorian suspected he might have originally lived somewhere in the south, but was driven away from his previous home by something. "I hear you bring gifts for me," Stonechild eventually said. "We sure do," Zack grinned. The two of them handed their Dragonheart stones to the elemental, who accepted them without any apparent excitement or comment. He rotated the stones in his palms for a few moments before setting them aside on the nearby table. "It is a good gift," Stonechild said. "But is it really a gift? I would never claim to be an expert on humanity, but in my experience your kind is rarely this generous for no reason." "It's a gift," Zack said. "We do want something from you but we're willing to pay for it. Those stones are yours no matter what you do. Even if I throw you two out right now?" Stonechild asked curiously. "Even then," Zorian confirmed. I think I like you too," Stonechild said. "So what is it that you want from me? I warn you in advance that I dislike fighting. Me and my kind will not be your mercenaries no matter how much you offer to pay." "We're only after knowledge," Zorian said. "Only knowledge?" Stonechild repeated, his black eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet you're willing to pay such a heavy price just for a chance to petition me for it. It is surely not just knowledge then. What kind of forbidden secrets are you after?" "We want to know where the primordials were imprisoned," Zack said. Thus far Stonechild had been very serene and self-assured in his mannerisms. It was somewhat at odds with his childlike appearance, to be honest. However, when Zack mentioned what they were after, Stonechild actually flinched a little. "Why would you seek the ancient blood?" Stonechild asked, leaning forward towards them. "No matter what your reasons are, you're only inviting disaster upon yourself. There is no gain to be had there." "You say that, but I heard there are people who gained great powers by binding the blood of primordials to themselves," Zorian said. It wasn't something he intended to do, but he still wanted to hear what Stonechild had to say about it. "Artifacts of forgotten wars at the beginning of time," Stonechild said, waving his hand dismissively in the air. "Should you find one of these out there in the vast world unclaimed by anyone, that is obviously a great boon for you. But to tamper with the cages that hold back those of the ancient blood is utter foolishness. Since the time of their imprisonment, no one has ever received gift from their kind." "Are you saying they're actively malicious?" Zack asked curiously. "Do you hate the bugs eating your crops? Do you torture mosquitoes for drinking your blood?" Stonechild asked. "We are all nothing to them, elemental and human both." Right, we're not people to them so they can do whatever they want to us," Zack said. "It's fine though, we don't really want anything from the primordials themselves. What we're really interested is those fancy pocket dimensions that hold them." "Pocket what?" Stonechild asked, cocking his head to the side in confusion. Apparently he never encountered that particular term and couldn't figure out the meaning from the context provided. "They're cages," Zack clarified. "The thing that holds them outside our reality." "Ah," Stonechild nodded. "That is less disturbing. But I caution you to forget the idea anyway. Cracking the prisons is probably beyond you, thankfully, but you might end up accidentally contacting the prisoner or attract unwanted attention. Few such prisons are truly unguarded. We'd really want to take a look at one anyway. Do you think we could come to some kind of agreement?" said Zorian, motioning towards the Dragonheart stones with his head. "There are more stones like that where those came from. And we might have more gifts for you besides. Even if I was willing to help you with this, I honestly do not know where the ancient blood was buried, Stonechild said. I cannot help you. The elder elemental disguised as a child glanced towards the stones for a second before shifting his attention back to them. However, he said, I might know a couple of other elementals that would be able to help you. Ah, that's fine too, I guess, Saurian said. I suppose you'd be willing to give this information to us? Stonechild smiled widely. For a price, he said. Break. Yes, Glittering River of Stars said, sagging a little. We will agree to let you observe us use the Bakura Gate in exchange for. I can't believe I'm saying this, time travel-related favors. Finally. It was about freaking time, Zack muttered under his breath. It turned out he hadn't been quiet enough, because River of Stars bristled slightly at his words and immediately turned to him. What would you know? This was a difficult decision for us. Even if you're telling the truth about time travel, we have no way of enforcing this deal. You can renege on it easily enough and we won't even know an agreement existed in the first place. Yeah, and that's why your elders refused to accept a mere promise alone, Zack shot back. We paid you an absurd amount of crystallized mana and other valuables for this favor. Plus we destroyed that nest of serpent-bearded toads for you as a sign of good faith. And if you're telling the truth about the time loop, none of that will matter in the long run, will it? River of Stars asked rhetorically. Saurian thought about getting involved, but ultimately decided that any words would just be throwing oil into the fire. Truthfully, he understood the doubts and hesitation of the Silent Doorway adepts all too well. He would feel the same in their position. He actually hadn't expected this negotiation to succeed at all in this restart. He expected it would take at least 2 or 3 times before he learned how to approach them correctly. However, saying that out loud would be the equivalent of shooting himself in the foot. The Arania probably wouldn't appreciate it much and Zack would feel betrayed. His fellow time traveler had been getting steadily more annoyed with the colony as they dragged their many feet and the end of the restart inexorably approached, so he probably wouldn't appreciate Saurian taking their side, even as a diplomatic tactic. Thankfully, after staring at each other really hard, Zack and River of Stars decided to mutually back down. Whatever, River of Stars said. The elders have reached their decision, so there is no point in arguing this. Is there anything else? Yes, Saurian spoke up. Do you have something that would help us convince your web we're telling the truth in future restarts? Ah yes, River of Stars said. There was some discussion about that. We have something. We have no idea how useful it will be to you since we've never actually made any contingencies in case of time travel being real, but you of all people can afford to do some trial and error on this. Hold on. She was still and silent for about 10 seconds, probably engaging in telepathic communication with the rest of her web. Prepare for a memory packet transfer, she told him before sending a telepathic probe at his mental shields. Saurian allowed her to establish contact, and she immediately shoved a small memory packet at him. He quickly perused the contents, noticing it mostly held meaningless strings of numbers, well, meaningless to him at least, as well as some kind of detailed map of the regions surrounding their web. He unraveled the memory packet and repackaged the information into a memory packet of his own. That way he wouldn't have to worry about it decaying on him the way the Matriarch's memory packet did, and then gently pushed at the connection with River of Stars, signaling to her to end the connection. She did as he asked, but she couldn't help but take a quick peek at his memories as she withdrew. Saurian didn't even try to stop her. Instead, he simply pushed a memory of him being stabbed to death in one of the earliest restarts at her memory probe, causing her to flinch a little and hastily break contact. It's rare to see a human so well versed in telepathic conflict, she said a little awkwardly. Thank you, Saurian said. Can we see the gate now? Yes, she confirmed a little more respectfully. Apparently his little show of telepathic sophistication had humbled her a bit. He made a mental note to challenge one of their elders to a telepathic duel in future restarts, just to establish his telepathic credentials. Maybe they'd look down on them less if he did that. I'll lead the way. River of Stars led them down the twisting tunnels of the Iranian settlement, far deeper into the colony than they'd ever been allowed to go before. There, in a large underground chamber, stood a circular stone platform that held a familiar black icosahedron that was the Bakura Gate. Well, it was familiar to Saurian at least. You've never seen a Bakura Gate before? Saurian asked Zack, who was currently slowly circling the construct and inspecting it curiously. In all those countless restarts, It never crossed your mind to seek one out? No, why would it? Zack asked, poking the black bars experimentally with his finger. They don't work and nobody knows how to activate them. I'm no researcher. If countless scholars couldn't get anything out of them, what could I do? It's really similar to the Abasan one, though. You can clearly tell they were inspired by one of these things when they made theirs. The fact that there is another gate-using group operating around is disturbing, a nearby Urania commented. You should have mentioned that information earlier when you spoke with us. Sorry, Sorian shrugged. I didn't think it was important. So how will this work exactly? Considering you gathered no less than 15 Uranias here, I'm guessing the activation requires some kind of group ritual. It is a ritual, yes, the Urania confirmed. Her name was Marvelous Geode, if he remembered correctly. Well, her name was quite a bit longer than that actually, but that was what it shortened to anyway. It's not the correct way to activate the gate, but it's the only way we know. What does the ritual involve exactly? Well, she hesitated. First of all, we need to establish contact with the spirit of the gate. Wait, the gate has a spirit? Sorian asked incredulously. He focused his mind sense on the gate for the moment. I don't sense a mind within it. Of course you can't, she said. The spirit is completely disconnected from the Great Web. Its mind is permanently dark, much like your friend's mind is under that spell he keeps constantly active around us. Yet the spirit is very much real.